There we go. Welcome to the Morning Devo with Bo. We are on. I think the mic is back on. I had it off. Sorry about that. So it was a lot of lips moving, but I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't coming out live. So now I think I am. And welcome to the Morning Devo with Bo. I'm in the office over here. And whenever I change studios, it's always a little bit abrupt, and there's always you got buttons to hit and all that. And I'm so excited about getting into this passage as well. If you can believe it, these chapters in Corinth just are really some of my favorite subjects and things to talk about. I find them very socially interesting, and I think you will. This one is chapter 11 as well. Let me first just preface the Devo this morning by saying that I am so glad that the Bible is different from my culture in some really important ways. Um, Sometimes we can read, books that are included in the Bible, and we can get this idea that wow, this sounds really old-fashioned, or just aged. But I find that kind of cool. I find that good because I got to imagine there's some things in my culture that maybe aren't right or maybe aren't accurate, or maybe what we complain about as people are areas of our life that we are struggling with. And so we naturally want to rebel from what is the good or what is the right. And so it's, to me, I love that idea that God is different, that God is not like us. I like that idea that to walk with God is different. It's a different kind of walk than just a walk without Christ. And to me, I don't feel, upset about the differences between God and me, or His Word and my thoughts. To me, I find it very beautiful, and this is why, is because I hope that when I think of heaven, and I always think of the Smiths. I don't know if you remember the band The Smiths, but when I think of the Smiths, I think of a song that Morrissey sang, and at the end it just said, "There must be a better world," and then he keeps reiterating this idea, there must be, and the whole point of that is that I want heaven to be a lot different, a lot better. And even the Smiths, Morrissey of all people, sang it like that. There must be something greater, better. And so when I read the Bible and about the standards of God, and I kind of go, yes, I hope it's something different. I hope it's not just what we see here, right? And when it comes to the things that we struggle with most in our heart, it might be just that tipping us off to that's really what we need most in our life, and that's why we struggle with it. And I think there's no greater thing in our culture that we could get into great talks with about the issues of what equality means, what actually equality looks like. That is even a difficult question. Or what equity is, what really that looks like, what authority looks like, what do roles look like, what does a family look like, what does friendship look like, what does child-parent relationship look like. These things are huge discussions, and not just discussions, but they're huge points of tension in our society. And and we're not alone, by the way. Let me read to you a little bit about what Rome was like back in Paul's day, and it says this: women of Rome, wealthier women, became bored as they could not be of influence in politics. So they spent money beautifying themselves, not for their husbands, but for their lovers, taking to religion or suing for divorce. Only the vulgar shared a bedroom with their husbands. That's right. In the old days, you didn't even share a husband or a bed with your spouse. You people slept around. One of the great statements of Rome was by this general's attitude towards women. And it says, "We keep mistresses for pleasure, concubines for our day-to-day bodily needs, and we have wives to produce legitimate children and serve as trustworthy guardians of our homes." Now, let me read to you some more, just so you get the idea of what cultures are like, not just ours, but so many. A man's wife, by contrast to his life, rose in her own time, in her own room, drew on her slippers, donned an underrobe on top of her loincloth, breastband and tunic in which she had slept, drank a glass of water, and was ready to face not the world, but the mirror, her maids, and her innumerable pots of cosmetics. It took hours to do her hair. Marriage and divorce in Rome. At the beginning of the 2nd century, many of them were rootless and restless, talking about women. "Her score is mounting," remarked Juvenal Sauer of the gay divorce of his day. Quote, "She had 8 husbands in 5 winters. Write that on our tombstone." Women divorced their husbands because they were bored, husbands their wives because there were wrinkles were beginning to show, or because they were immoral or vain or shrewish. The emancipated woman of early imperial Rome had much in common with the more competitive type of feminist today. So the reason why I read those and kind of give you guys this introduction here to this is because, man, there was a lot of issues back then, as there are today, when it comes to our culture and how we look at one another. And in Paul, when he's writing about our freedom in Christ and our love for one another, Paul wants to discuss with the Corinthians also something that has to deal with our equality, our roles, our authorities, topics that really we struggle with. So let me read this. It says, "I am so glad, dear brothers, that you have been remembering and doing everything I taught." Now, do you think Paul was a little sarcastic there? I don't know. And it says, "But there is one matter I want to remind you about, that a wife is responsible to her husband, and her husband is responsible to Christ, and Christ is responsible to God." Now, even just that statement alone is, people will go, "What?" And to me, this is amazingly challenging. Responsible to Christ. I'm responsible. There's a responsibility in my life. And am I okay with, do I understand what I am responsible for? Everybody's responsible for something. You can't get out of that bubble of this, by the way. You can't jump out of this idea of us learning to submit, us learning to play our roles, to do our roles, us being responsible to a higher authority. All of us, doesn't matter how much you complain about it or what you think about it, we all are in that box. As human beings, there always is I hate to use the word pecking order, but there's always a set of roles and responsibilities that we are moving in. And Paul starts off right off the bat that, hey, do you know you have a responsibility? And I don't want to get into all the details other than there's, a lot going on culturally always, and whether it's today's world or, like I mentioned, in the Roman world too of Paul's day. There's always a lot going on, but it doesn't matter. What's cool is that the Bible's different. And the thing that it's teaching us is that first we have a responsibility. And am I okay with that? Am I okay with my responsibility? He says that is why if a man refuses to remove his hat while praying or preaching, he dishonors Christ. And that is why a woman who publicly prays or prophesies without a covering on her head dishonors her husband. For her covering is a sign of her subjection to him. Yes, if he refuses to wear a head covering, then she should cut off all her hair. Now, this is kind of an exaggeration, Paul says, because Paul likes to do this. He does this in, I think it's the book of Galatians, where he tells people that are into legalism, they're into, coercing people into salvation through the law, through obedience to some letter of the law, the commands. Paul says, hey, if you guys think circumcision saves you, man, then if that's what you think salvation's about, is being circumcised, then why don't you guys just cut it all off? And he uses that kind of sarcasm. And here he talks about the cultural issues in Rome, in Corinth, especially in the Grecian culture, Roman Greco culture. And he says, hey, if you're going to rebel, if you're going to be rebellious, why don't you just go all the way? And that's like the overall pull of Paul. And Paul's overall idea, without getting into all the minutia of this, because definitely at Running Light Ministries, on some of our podcast, we've already talked about these things in detail, and we will again. You could always go to runninglight.org and go through our podcasts and check that out. That's runninglight.org. But without going into all the details here, Paul's just saying, hey, live in responsibility, live in honor with one another. Understand your place, where you're at, what God has put in place, how God has established things. And are you okay with that? See, when you come in out of in a sense the world culture, it's really easy for us just to go, you know what, man, I don't want to go maybe God's way. But I tell you what, for me it's the opposite. For me, coming out of the world's way and coming into understanding the Bible, I was more like, thank God there's a different way. Thank God there's a different way. What's your family without any kind of responsibility, without any kind of roles? What's a family like without anything like that, without any kind of submission to a good authority figure? What's it like? I know what it's like, and it ain't good. It isn't good. That's not a good family when you don't have good authority figures and you don't have people being responsible. And so when everything is just arbitrary and there's nobody who has an authority, no one has any good authority going on, no one has any accountability, no responsibility, then everything is just up for grabs. People that argue with this section of Scripture, I don't think they've lived in a messed up home. That's my thought. That's Bo's personal opinion. I just don't think they've lived in a real nasty environment. You see a lot of people in Rome, man, they were living in some nasty stuff. And some people, were trying to figure out, what is my role? And, they probably wanted to do the right things, but didn't quite know what to do. And so I hope that's making some sense. Paul's saying, hey, let's look at how God's established things. There's a responsibility, there's a role, there's an accountability, and let's move in that way. So look at your heart and just go, hey, do I have a rebellious heart? And that's what Paul's getting at, in the big picture here in this chapter. Is it in the family, are you rebellious? In the church, are you rebellious? When it comes to just who you are in society, is there a rebellious streak within me? And I have to look at that. And it says God's glory in man, God's glory is man made in his image, and man's glory is the woman. The first man didn't come from woman, but the first woman came out of man. And Adam, the first man, was not made for Eve's benefit, but Eve was made for Adam. So a woman should not wear a covering on her head as a sign that she is, or a woman should wear a covering on her head as a sign that she is under man's authority, a fact for all the angels to notice and rejoice in. Now, my friends at A Reason for Hope, they'll answer any question you want on these verses. If you feel like one of these verses is kind of odd, especially the fact of the angels to notice and rejoice in, that section, the angels, because of the angels, that might be one you want to call or get on this Facebook channel at 5 and say, hey, Scott, Sean, Peter, what's that all about? In our Devo, I'm not going to get all into my thoughts on those things because it would just take up a ton of time. But I love, again, the idea of these things is that Paul's basically saying, hey, the reason for these things, the reason is there's a purpose. God has a purpose. And when someone makes a TV, that TV has a purpose. And if you take that TV and you use it as a hammer, you might get the nail through the piece of wood, but you're also probably going to get the nail through the television. And I don't know if your television is going to work very well. See, Paul's making an argument from the idea of purpose, origin, the purpose of something, its beginning. And from the beginning, it wasn't this way in the culture. From the beginning, it wasn't this way. And therefore, we should look to the beginning. Now, Jesus made this same argument, right? This shouldn't be odd to us. Jesus said divorce wasn't from the beginning. And he goes back to the time of Adam and Eve before the fall, where Paul does the same type of thing. He says, hey, this was how God created things. And we have to look at that and just, again, we have to go, hey, am I going to learn how to be accountable and submit to that and come underneath that? You know, within the church, are we gonna have, is it just gonna be chaotic? You know, is that what we mean by equality? What do we mean by equality? What does that mean? That's a very good question and something to really discuss, because I don't think we think it means what it really means. I don't think we understand those terms too well when we're talking about equality in our society. We hear that term all the time, equality. Well, what do you mean equality? My wife to be like me? Well, my wife's not like me. She's different. And well, in what way? Well, she's her gender's different. Some people argue that her sex is different. So what does it mean she's equal to me? Well, she's, you know, it doesn't matter if you're man or woman. Well, then what about someone who is a woman but wants to become a man? Does it matter? You see where the problems all break down. It does matter. We know things matter. We know things are different. We can't fight it. We can try all we want, but God's purposes stand. The TV is a TV. It's never going to be a good hammer. It's going to be just best when it's used for its proper purpose. And am I okay with that? Am I going to surrender to that? Maybe I'll have more peace if I just learn to surrender to that. You know, maybe, this morning you can look at, hey, do I have peace? And maybe if you don't, you can look at, hey, what is the rebellious nature of my heart? You know, the Bible does say our heart is deceitfully wicked, far above all things. So maybe that's what's bothering you today. So he says, but remember that in God's plan, men and women need each other. So I love this part, right? Paul kind of says, hey, we need each other. We're important to one another. See, saying that we're different doesn't mean that we're not important to one another. That's, unity and diversity. We talk a lot about diversity, but do we understand diversity well? I don't think we understand. But Paul's talking about that. He's saying, hey, we have diversity, but we also have unity. We are part of one another. And that's what he says. But remembers God's plan, that in God's plan, men and women need each other. There is a necessary need for one another. And when you need something, we have to see its value, right? For although the first woman came out of man, all men have been born from woman ever since, and both men and women come from God, their creator. What do you yourselves really think about this? Is it right for a woman to pray in public without covering her head? Doesn't even instinct itself teach us that women's heads should be covered? For women are proud of their long hair, while a man with long hair tends to be ashamed. Now, you might think I have long hair, but I don't really have long hair compared to probably what they're talking about when it says long hair. But if anyone wants to argue about this, all I can say is that we never teach anything else than this. that a woman should wear a covering when prophesying or praying publicly in the church, and all the church feel the same way about it. So obviously there was things that Paul wanted to share with them to help them walk in a way that would be conveying the glory of God in God's divine purpose for men and women. And that's really what Paul is getting at in all this. One other note that I'll share this morning, and that is sometimes we can look at this and we can, some people have said, oh, well, this is, a knock on women. But man, that's such a weird way of looking at this passage. If anything, it's a knock on men. Why? Because men, it says clearly, are responsible to Christ. And if men don't act responsible to Christ, then it seems like things break down. It seems like that's what this is kind of implying, is that if the first line of, the first line's Jesus is totally surrendered to the Father, and then the men are surrendered to Christ, and then women are surrendered to men, specifically wives to their husbands, and then those within the body of Christ, those women are surrendered to the male authority within the church. It seems like if the men break down their responsibility, then maybe that's why the society breaks down as well. Now, this is why I say this, and this is maybe a bit too much for the Devo, but I'll give it to you. In Hosea, when the women were acting in rebellion, God says, don't judge the women, but judge the men, because the men have gone astray from me. And it's really interesting, that passage. It's, I think, in Hosea chapter 4. Yeah, the women have gone astray, but don't judge them, judge the men. And if you have ever wondered why our culture has gone the way it's gone in its roles, its ideas of family, its ideas of sexuality, all those things, I don't think you need to look far to see really where the responsibility lies. To me, when it comes to issues like abortion and all those issues, those are men issues. It's not that it's not a men's issue alone. But I think when you look at just the breakdown of what we as men have become, it's not too easy to see how we've become a society like we are today. If we're not going to yield to Christ and we're not going to be accountable to Christ, then we really will go astray in every single way. And everything else just tends to trickle down and break down like a domino effect. So that's my little Bo caveat, and it makes me think just like, wow, man, I see my own failures, and I go, man, Lord, you know what? It drives me to go, I want to be more like you. Man, I want to be more like you, Jesus. Help me to be more like you. And it really encourages me, because knowing his grace, and he loves us so much, and we're saved by grace through faith, not of works, and that I can come boldly to the throne. I know that it's his desire and his passion to make me like him. And I can have full confidence that he is moving me away from the arbitrary ways of the world into a purposeful, meaningful life and role in the body that he has given me. And so anyway, what a cool section. I really love it. Hey, you guys have a great one. Remember, question for hope, or a reason for hope at 5. Get some questions answered if you got some specifics on this. And tonight we have service as well at 6:30, so it should be a great time in the book of Hebrews. So you guys have a great day, okay? Bye-bye.